It's a great privilege to come to the Diocese of Trenton. I come from the Diocese of Rockville Centre on Long Island, New York. The name is Lisante, which is Italian-American. Would there be any other Italian-Americans here? Thank you. I would be less than honest if I didn't tell you that my full name is James Patrick Lisante. My mother was a McNeil, and I guess there are a few Irish Americans as well here? Yes. I always say when you're Irish and Italian, you have the best of both worlds, you know? Half of you sins, the other half feels guilty about it. I'll let you figure out which is which. I have done all this work as you have in marriage and marriage preparation and counseling all these years of 34 years of priesthood, and I love it. But I would say the best credential for any of us in speaking about marriage and family life is the family that made us, informed us, and shaped us. And I'm privileged to have been, in my last parish, the pastor of a parish that was my home parish. So that for 12 years I lived across the street in the rectory from my parents who lived and in my father's case died there. A wonderful privilege. And I think whatever I know of family life and marriage begins so much with them. And in fact, it was a great privilege on the morning that he had a heart attack and died to be able to go there and to pray with him and to see him into the next stage of life. And this delicious Irish Catholic mother of mine continues to live. She's 94, and we moved her in with my sister and her children, and then I took a parish close by so that most nights we could spend time together, which we do. It's a great, great privilege. I was talking to your bishop about his mom as well. But family, the families that we come from, so much form and shape everything we say and feel about marriage and family life. I have to tell you that like many priests, I think I have sometimes romanticized marriage. When you don't have something, you tend to think it must be amazingly great. And so I would tell you that when I was in college, I dated for 4 years this beautiful woman named Tony. And it was a big deal because I was 19 and she was 23. A hot older woman, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, we went our separate ways, and she had a life and a child, and just recently decided, in all these years, like many priests, I've always said, God, I wonder what would have happened if, how different it would have been if. I wonder what we could have done together. So I decided out of the blue that I'd give her a call and let's do lunch. And we did. We got together just a few months ago. We sat down to lunch, and I want to tell you, after 30 some odd years of romanticizing what it might have been, I sat there across from the still beautiful Tony, and I thought to myself, thank you, God, for sparing me this. We had nothing in common. Marriage is, as we know, sometimes romanticized by the culture and sometimes debunked by the culture. But I want to talk about today the fact that while it might be, as one of my rabbi friends says, the hard way out, it's still the best way out. In my last parish assignment, I had, in the morning, a beautiful wedding of two beautiful people, young people, deeply in love, gaga in love with each other, couldn't keep their hands off each other, even on the altar. And I remember looking at them thinking, beautiful, romantic, delightful as they were, they haven't got a clue. And then later on in the afternoon, Joe Parag, an usher in my church, I guess Joe would be in his 80s, mid-80s at that point. He was married almost 60 years to June. And he said, could you stop by the house this afternoon? He said, June is coming to the end of the journey. She'd been battling cancer for years, and I'd like you to anoint her. And so I did. In the morning I had the wedding. In the afternoon I went over to see June and Joe Parag. And when I got to the house, I was struck by a few things. There was a hospital bed in the living room, and June was there, and there were all sorts of people from hospice and nurses. But what struck me is that the living room couch, which was just a few feet away from the hospital bed, was done up like a bed. So I said to Joe, well, who sleeps there? And he said, I do. And I said, but Joe, you have all this nursing care, all these hospice people. Why don't you go upstairs and get a decent night's sleep so you can be more strong in the face of this challenge? And he said, Father Jim, almost 60 years ago, I stood on the altar and I promised her, I'm always going to be there. And when she wakes up at night, and when she's lonely, and when she's scared, and when she wonders what's the next stage of life, I want to be 1 foot away to let her know that she's not facing that alone. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if we could take all those wonderful young couples we work with, and all those wonderful people in pre-Cana, and all those wonderful couples who come to us to be married, and we could bring them to Joe and June's house and say, this is what you're saying yes to. Not just the good and wonderful stuff, but the stuff that's not always so wonderful, not always so easy, but the very meaning and essence of life. Can we say to them on their wedding day that when you say those words, it means that you're going to love and desire each other when you're beautiful and young and dynamic and sexy, but 40 years from now, when you look like the back end of a truck, you'll still say, I still find her the most beautiful woman in the world. How do we bring them to a point where we can hope that they will see marriage as we do, as a time to share certainly mountaintop experiences together, but also the valleys of life, and to see them as equal parts of the beautiful sacrament we celebrate? That one is not better than the other. Oh, we had great times, too bad for these bad times. No, that the bad times enrich and strengthen and give meaning to the very vow that we espouse. I wonder if I can suggest too that you and I know we're living in times that are very, very tough for anybody who's considering marriage. It's a confusing time, and I was jotting down a few things that you have to deal with and I have to deal with, dealing with people who are considering marriage. One is simply that worship among most of the people who come to us to be married, if they come to us, is very limited. The majority of young couples are not practicing their faith. And what's striking to me is while there are 168 hours in every week, and they find the time to eat, to sleep, to be with people they love, to go to school, to go to work, they don't find that 1 hour to embrace time to pray, or to come to Mass, or to be part of the parish family. And part of what I hope we can talk about today is how do we renew their interest and get them to see that that 1 hour, if that's all they give, may be the source of cement, glue, power that holds it all together in a society so often ripping at marriage. I'm thinking to myself about the fact that even in their own family lives, once they're married, we know for sure that they're experiencing less and less time together as family. Do you know that in one study done recently, the average American family shared 1 meal together a week, and that it was over in less than 20 minutes? And by the way, they admitted in the article that in many cases those meals are filled with the distraction of TV and music and every other kind of public entertainment instead of focusing on each other. The other thing I wanted to mention is the power of and the impact of, and I know you talked about this here today, of social media, that I would suggest to you that social media is coming to a point where it's replacing conversation within families and within marriages. More time spent on social media than we ever spend talking to the people we say we love. You know, at Thanksgiving, I went over to my sister's house and everybody was there, all the kids, the nieces, the nephews, and I had gotten there a little bit late. And as I walked into the house, I looked into the dining room and I saw that their heads were bowed, and I thought, what a shame that I've missed the opening prayer. They were texting. They weren't praying, they were texting, and that's not uncommon. To bring your phone with you to the table and to be focused on that other, that out there, that somebody else somewhere, instead of the people sitting right next to us who are God's greatest gift to us, our families. Social media, a wonderful thing, also a great distraction. You may know the statistic, but it's worth mentioning. You know that they say 1/4 of our American families are grappling with someone in our immediate family who is suffering from addiction. And as you know, if you deal at all with addiction, it doesn't just obviously impact on the person who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, but that we are all reacting to that person. And so we're all impacted by the disease, by the challenge of addiction. Again, a major part of family life when 1/4 of our families, 1 in 4 of us, have somebody in our family who we know is grappling with this challenge. How about this as a new thing? Did you know that now we're moving to a point where we're going to have 1/3 of American families with 3 and in some cases 4 generations living under the same roof? If you don't think that's a source of pressure, you haven't experienced it. Because the truth is, it changes the whole game. It's not the young couple having their babies grow up and move on. But it's mom and mom's mom moving in and putting new economic and social pressure on us in ways we've never known before. A challenging time. I won't belabor the issue of divorce, you know it as well as I. I remember years ago finding a picture of an aunt of mine, and she was in her wedding dress, but standing next to a guy who wasn't my uncle. And it was the unspoken that Aunt Ethel had actually had a previous marriage. Back then, that was rare, not so rare now. I'd be willing to bet that there is not a person sitting here today who doesn't have someone in the family who's gone through the experience of divorce. And as you know, that is always a source of pain and damage. You know, Danny DeVito in that wonderful movie, The War of the Roses, says it well when someone says to him as the lawyer, well, who won the divorce, Mr. or Mrs. Rose? And he said, divorce is never about winning. It's always about degrees of losing and the pain that that impact has on family life. These are just some of the challenges we face. You may know this, there's a 35% increase in the number of reported cases of spousal abuse in the last 10 years alone. And of course, you know as well as I too, as church people, that we are facing a reality that there are fewer and fewer of our own co-religionists who are choosing to get married in church. One of the things I like to do with engaged couples is say to them, where are you having your wedding? Meaning, what church? And having the response be, oh, the new Hyde Park Inn, Carlisle on the Green. The first thing they mention is the catering hall. Where are you getting married? It should be, you would hope, St. Bernard's, St. Mary's, St. Anne's. But the whole game has changed. And I'm sure you've talked today about the fact that now they want nice, pretty locations and would prefer not to get married in church at all because they see no particular value in going to church and then having to get in a car and go to a reception. Better to do location weddings. It's more convenient. And in this culture where convenience is so widely celebrated, you and I are up against these challenging times, confusing times. Give you another example from my own pastoral ministry, and probably every priest here has had a similar experience. We have this thing, the PMI, the premarital inventory form you fill out. I had one last year, and you know, the last question on the form is, do you understand that faithfulness is a part of this deal? And of course, this beautiful young couple said, yes, of course they do, and they both signed their name to it. Within a month, he had his bachelor party. At the bachelor party, he connected with 2 hookers, had unprotected sex, picked up STDs, and on the honeymoon passed it to his bride, who came back to me and said, could I have a copy of the premarital inventory? I'd like to use it as the basis for my annulment. If he could in 1 month say yes to understanding faithfulness, and in the next month go to a bachelor party and do that, we've got problems. What was more striking to me is that at the bachelor party was her brother and her father. How did they allow that kind of thing to go on? Because again, it's all just good fun, right? But what does it say about the values that we're trying to promote, that we've got our work to do? If I can too suggest another example of something that is ever present in your parish and mine, and that is the growth of dependence, not just on the internet, but of internet pornography and its impact on family life. I had one beautiful bride, I'll call her Rose, and she really was one of the most striking women I've ever seen. And she came to me 6 months after their wonderful wedding to say, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but you know, she said, since the honeymoon, we've had relations twice. What am I doing wrong? I think I'm good in bed, Father. I think I'm okay. I love the man. What's the matter? She found out shortly thereafter that in the trunk of his car was a laptop where he enjoyed regularly pornography away from her, and admitted, when finally he was willing to talk about it, that he found that more stimulating. Imagine that we look at naked strangers and find ourselves more excited sexually than making love to the best friend you'll ever have, that wife. It's a confusing time. How about this? Let's add this to confusion. I said this in my church last week, and the people knew what I was talking about. I am sorry as heck that for 30 or 40 years, Bruce Jenner has been confused. But having said that, it is very troubling to me that we're living in a culture that is calling him courageous. I think courageous is those Christians in Syria who refuse to renounce their faith and have their heads cut off. I think courageous is the guys who wear the uniform and go around the world and live and die to protect us. That's courageous. But I decide one day I was a man and the next day I'm a woman, and suddenly the New York Times calls me brave and courageous and amazingly daring. This is a confusing time for the people that come to us to be married. And our job, it seems to me, is to try to get the people in our parishes, the people who are married, the people we love and want to serve, back on track. And let me suggest a couple of ways I think we might be able to do that. First of all, maybe we can admit right up front, because it helps everybody, if we don't hold people to a ridiculous standard, in the sense that there are no perfect families. Never have been, never will be. When I go to family life conferences around the country and I say, who here comes from a perfect family? When someone raises their hand, I usually say, you need to see me for confession. Never has been, never will be. And I think the good place to begin is to suggest that the idealization of family life and marriage is always going to leave us disappointed. But we want people to be realistic, that there will be times of walking in that valley I spoke of, and that it's good to be in touch with that and to expect it and therefore to be ready for it. And I say there are no perfect families, and I include my own. You know, I have two wonderful sisters. Patty's great, and she's very involved in her church and her parish, and her kids are all practicing the faith. But I also have Joan. Joan's the oldest sister, a lawyer. Right there, you've got a problem. And I remember, you know, when she got married, that we certainly talked about the children, and, you know, they would be baptized and raised as Catholics. She lives in Virginia. And I remember a few months after Jonathan, the first child, was born, calling her saying, you know, when are we going to set a date for this baptism? And having Joan say, well, you know, my husband and I have been talking about it, and we don't know if it's right to foist this on a child. You know, why don't you let them grow up and they can think about it and decide for themselves? And I said, Joan, are you going to let Jonathan decide if he wants to eat good food, or go to school, or get his shots, or take care of himself? Of course not. You make decisions all the time for your child because they're good decisions for the good of the child. In the same way, how can you not be willing to, from the beginning, share this faith that has formed and shaped us with this child you love? Well, this is a private matter. We don't want to be pressured into it. We're going to wait till he's older. And it became quite a source of tension in the family. A few months later, I went down to visit Joan with my delicious and wonderful Irish Catholic mother. We decided we would not talk about the elephant in the room. And then one day, Joan said, out of the blue, you know, I'm a little short on groceries. I need to go out, but I haven't had a chance with the baby and everything. And as one voice, my mother and I said, oh, no, you go. Joan went off, and my mother had the baby in the kitchen. I took little Jonathan. I said, Mom, I'm going downstairs to watch TV with him for a while. And she said, but Jimmy, he's only 3 months old. They don't watch TV at this point. Mom, give me the baby. And I took beautiful Jonathan downstairs, and I confess to you that I did the deed. And I came back upstairs, and my mother, who was the sweetest, gentlest, most wonderful woman in the world, looked sternly at me and said, Jimmy, did you baptize that baby? I said, Mom, I can't lie to you. I did. That's good. She said, I wasn't sure if mine took. When Joan came back from the store, she looked at my mother, looked at me, and said, so did you do it? You know? There are no perfect families. Our job is to just keep challenging gently, comfortably, loving them always, never turning our backs completely on anyone, even when we disagree, sometimes very strongly. I believe one of the things we've got to do is admit from the very beginning there are no perfect families. Let me suggest, too, that one of the things we can recommend from the very beginning in any counseling is that if you really, really value something, you give it time. I remember for years I worked at our diocesan office in family ministry, and I'd go in the morning from the cathedral residence, and I'd work there. I'd come back. When I'd leave in the morning, I'd see people on the trellis of the Long Island Railroad there, and they'd be going into Manhattan to work, 5, 6, 7 in the morning. I'd go to work, I'd come back, I'd have dinner, and then I'd look out my window at night and see these same people getting off the train at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I thought to myself, it's kind of ironic that they are breaking their backs to support a family that they almost never see. To challenge families in our parishes to examine, when you put all the hours together, all 168 of them, how much is actually spent with the people that you're working for? How many hours are spent, quality time I mean, with the people we say we love the most? Now I know we all face economic challenges. These are hard times to pay the bills. At the same time, at the end of the day, to have successfully paid the bills but to have lost our families, what a terrible burden that would be. One of the parishioners in my parish is a very successful guy, a big chief financial officer in a company in New York, and he worked his whole life so he could build these beautiful homes. And recently his 28-year-old son took the leap off a building in New York and killed himself. And he said to me, Father, what was the point of all this? I worked for them and I didn't notice that they were in pain, that my son was lost and needed someone to find him. So I made all this money for him and I did all this stuff for him, but now I have lost him. And of course, not every crisis in family ends in suicide, but I'm suggesting to you that for many of us, we've lost our way by virtue of the way in which we prioritize or don't prioritize what matters. Some of the guests I've had are interesting people on the show. One of them recently was a guy who plays for the Yankees named Mark Teixeira. And I said, Mark, tell me in your life, what is the priority? And he said, you're not going to believe me when I say this, but it's God first, family second, and a distant third is baseball. And I said, well, Mark, without baseball, nobody would even know who Mark Teixeira is. He said, yeah, I could live and die without that. But he said, if I'm not right with God, there's no eternal life. And if I'm not right with my family, then I've lost the only thing that really matters in this world. I need to have it set clearly, a sense of priorities, a sense of what matters. Drew Brees, the wonderful quarterback for New Orleans Saints, was a guest. And I said to him too, I said, look, you're a good-looking guy and you're on the road a lot. What is the temptation to cheat on your wife? He said, I haven't and I won't. I said, how come? He said, you know, I ruined my shoulder back when I played for San Diego and everyone thought my career was over. And he said, for a year, my wife slept next to me with her hand on my shoulder, holding in place the posts and the stitches, because I was regularly pulling them out as I tossed and turned at night. You don't have someone who's willing to be there in the quiet of the night to hold you and make sure you don't do damage to yourself and walk away from that. I know what matters. I know what my priorities are, so no, I don't cheat. When the interview was over and the cameras were off, his wife, Brittany, came out and she said, that was very nice. What he didn't tell you is for a year, I not only held his shoulder, but I had to wipe his butt. You certainly don't give up a wife like that, you know? A sense of priorities. Do we know who we really are? I'm going to suggest that we have to point out to the couple something that is an irrefutable fact, and it's not just true of the Catholic faith. Where a married couple practice their faith, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Islamic, there's no doubt about it that every statistic, every survey indicates that they have a lesser chance of divorce. And you say, why would that be, with all the differences in the religions? And I would suggest it's because every religion says the same thing about keep on keeping on, keep on trying, don't surrender, work it out, forgive. Forgive and then forgive again. And I'm going to suggest the only way a marriage can make it if it's rooted in a willingness to forgive. And if we don't communicate to the young couples the absolute necessity of being able to say, think of the worst thing he or she could do to you, and then ask yourself, can I forgive this? Can I not just momentarily let it go? Like the Italians, I may forgive, but I never forget. But can I truly forgive and let go of any hurt, because is my love truly unconditional? I am absolutely convinced that the vast majority of couples getting married in our churches are marrying in a conditional way. I will love you if, I will love you when, I will love you but. But very, very few who are willing to say, I will love you always and forever, no matter what. Very hard to do. And yet, if not that, then I'm telling you, the seeds are sown for disaster in marriage. Let me also suggest to you, too, that one of the things I think we need to do as a church is to encourage people to recognize, because I think the myth is still out there, people in my father's generation believed that if you went for counseling, if you went for help, it was in some way a sign of weakness, you know? How many of us have not heard in our own families that line that if we can't solve it ourselves, nobody outside the family can solve it? What a lot of hooey that is. The truth is we can't solve everything ourselves. And it takes great strength and great insight to be willing to say, whether I go to the parish priest or my deacon or a professional counselor or Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Retrovi or whatever program is out there to give me help, I will seek the help because my marriage and my family are worth fighting for. And we've got to, I think, in our preaching and teaching, make clear to these young couples, it's a sign of strength to say, I can't do it alone. I need help. Let's turn outside of ourselves and find objective assistance in the journey of marriage and family life. Let me also talk about something that's been a big part of my priesthood, because I've talked about it, and in fact, I believe it's got to be talked about even more, but when I do pre-Cana, when I do preparation for marriage, and I'm sure this is true for you, sex always sells. And so one of the things I find is that people want to ask lots of stuff about the church and the church's teachings on human sexuality. It's a part of every marital experience. It's a part of every family life experience. So why do you think it is that we really don't talk about it? The truth of the matter is that the Catholic Church has this incredible reputation as being the church of no. We're against everything. If it feels good, we say no. If it's sexual, we're against it. We see it all as sinful. That's the myth out there about us. And I'm going to suggest that we need to address that directly by pointing out that we're not the Church of No, that we believe that human sexual loving is one of the most powerful gifts in the world, that it's a way of being in touch with the divine. When I say to couples, when you have sex with each other, do you feel the presence of God? And they look at me like I've got three heads. You know, sex is what you do in bed, God is what you do in church. No! That in fact, when you're loving the right person in the right time, in the right place, that is an experience of God's real presence. And I'm telling you, if you ask most young people, is that what the church says? They wouldn't say it so, but they need to be in touch with the writings of John Paul and to see that we do not see it as a great negative, but rather as a positive that not only brings new life into the world, but also is a way of bonding together two people in a way that is like nothing else out there. But we can't celebrate that with these people if we're not talking about it. And let's be honest. When was the last time we heard a homily or even a good talk in church property that specifically addresses the issue? What do we say honestly about birth control? What do we say honestly about abortion? What do we say about premarital and extramarital sex? What do we say about masturbation? What do we say about pornography? Do we say anything at all? And if we're being silent on this, and they know from on top there are these teachings up in the sky, but in our lived experience of the parish, we don't want to talk about it, or we can't talk about it, or are uncomfortable talking about it. We're saying by our level of discomfort that there's something wrong with something where there's not something wrong. It's beautiful and it's life-giving and it's bonding, but we need to talk about it. And I mean that from the first meeting when they walk into the rectory. You know, I have this annoying habit, but I will generally try to get them, because I am a nice guy, I get them to relax a little bit, and we talk about where they come from and their families and all the rest of it. And then about 45 minutes into the meeting with the couples who are engaged and are planning to set the date, I say, by the way, just one more thing. Are you two having sex? You want to kill a conversation, that's the way to do it, you know? And they look at each other nervously, you know, like, what should we tell this guy? And I say, by the way, if you lie to a priest, you go right to hell, you know? But they eventually say, yeah. And I say, look, I think sex is wonderful. I think it's great. I think it's holy. I think it's life-giving. But I believe that it's supposed to be shared in the right time, right place, right person. So here's what I'm going to suggest to you. I would love it if when you stand on the altar a year from now, it wasn't just a continuation of what's going on already. You're going home, you're ending up in bed together, you're having sex all the time. So how does this change it? The fact that you stood on an altar changes it? Here's what I want you to think about doing. Would you think about the possibility that between now and your wedding day, you find non-sexual ways to relate to each other? That you find ways that don't involve the sex you've gotten used to? So that when, in fact, you go off on that honeymoon, it is truly a new beginning. It is a unique and wonderful and new creation that has happened when you two made that solemn pledge on the altar of God. And some, I'm sure, say yes to me and do whatever they want, but some actually give it some thought. I had a classic couple, and I've talked about them before, Joanne and Ray. I was in a very Italian neighborhood, my first parish. They were Joanne and Ray, very gavone, if you know what that means, okay? Now imagine her at this point. She had lots of big teased hair, a big wad of gum in her mouth, and I ran past them, you know, are you having sex? They said yes, they were. So I said, okay, listen, here's what I'd like you to do. And I asked them to do what I just told you. So Joanne was like amazed by this. I don't understand what you're saying. I said, I'm asking no sex between now and your wedding day. Like no sex. I mean, no sex. Not even a little, not even a little. Well, I don't understand. She says, what is this, something new from the church? I said, it's a couple of thousand years that I know of, Joanne, you know? Anyway, I turned to Ray. Now imagine, if you can, a young Sylvester Stallone. He spent a lot more time in the gym than he ever spent in church. And he had all the gold chains and the shirt open to the navel, the whole 9 yards. I said, Ray, what do you think of my idea? Between now and next year when you and Joanne get married, no sex. You find non-genital ways to express your love. Father Jim, I think it's a stupid idea. But he too, amazingly, promised he would give it a try. Anyway, a couple months go by, we meet again. And I get together, and Joanne is a different person. She said, you know, let's be honest. She said, we had gotten into a habit every weekend. We ended up in bed together. It had lost its meaning. She said, now, without sex, Ray is nicer to me. He's more polite to me. He's really kinder to me. He does things to me. He never held the door before. He's given me gifts and cards like he never did before. She said, I don't know who came up with this, but this was a good idea. I turned to Ray. I said, Ray, what do you think? And he said, Father Jim, I think it's a very, very stupid idea. He said, Father Jim, for 6 months, I have gotten nothing. You don't know. I said, I don't know. I said, Ray, 6 months would be like a holiday for me, you know? You know what I'm saying is, look, I don't know if they continue to embrace the pattern of finding non-genital ways to express love, but I think they at least gave it a try. And I think they gave it a try because they were challenged to think about what are you doing? One of the best scenes in movies for me, and I'm a big movie buff, in Moonstruck, is when Cher has been cheating on her fiancé and goes to confession. And they never show you the face of the priest. All they show you is his hands, and she says, you know, I cursed, I lied, I slept with my fiancé's brother. And he says, go back to that third one. That's pretty serious. And she says, I know. And all he tells her by way of penance is, Loretta, reflect on your life. Reflect on your life. That's what we're called to do for these young couples and the not so young couples. Anyone involved in the great mystery, which is marriage. Reflect on your life and choose wisely, and choose wisely. I think we need to begin to talk more openly about things that are sexual without embarrassment, without shame. When I say to parents, when I speak to parents groups and I say, look, you got to sit down with the kids, they're now entering into adolescence, and talk to them about sex, they say the same thing. My kids don't want to hear about sex from me, and you're probably right. It's discomforting for them. They don't want to think about you that way, much less them being told about what they should do with their bodies by their parents. And yet, I want that door to be open so that when they're in crisis, or when they're confused, or when she misses a period, or whatever she's going through, or he's going through, that they can know that door is always open. And this, by the way, I don't just mean in terms of heterosexual stuff, I mean homosexual stuff. If the numbers are right and there are a whole lot of people who are confused out there, I want them to know that their families are a place where they will find the welcome to talk about anything. We did this show based on the American Bishop's document called Always Our Children, and we aired it on PBS, and it was 2 guests, a guy named Wood, Jonathan Wood, and his mother Jill. The father had been a guy named Gary Wood, who was a quarterback for the Giants many years ago. I mention that because when Jonathan was about 24, 25 years old, he lived in Manhattan, his parents came in to see him. And they said to him, Jonathan, is there something about your life that you haven't told us that's important to you? And he realized the jig was up, and he said, you mean the fact that I'm gay? And they said, yeah. He said, well, I am. And he said, I'm sorry, I wouldn't have chosen this, and I wish I could have been honest with you, but I was scared, and I hope you'll still love and accept me. And his father, the big athlete, Gary Wood, started to cry. And Jonathan said, Dad, I'm sorry, please, I hope I didn't disappoint you, please, I'm sorry. And his father said, Jonathan, I'm not crying because you're gay. I'm crying because for 24 years you couldn't tell the people who love you the most in the whole world who you really are. And what a shame that is that we lost this time. It's only by, in church, in parish, in homily, in teaching, talking about things that matter, that we, I think, can help people to see that the church's teaching is a positive, life-giving force, and that we have nothing to be shy about when it comes to talking about the great gift of human sexual love, that it's worth a discussion and it's worth being talked about. And I mean that at every level, all those issues I mentioned. And I think by doing that, we can maybe save a few marriages and save families. I like to say to the couples, look, the engaged couples I'm talking about, do you think it's okay to have sex before marriage? And overwhelmingly, they say yes. And I say, okay, why is that? They say, because we love each other. And I say to them, okay, so you say love is all you need. But I'm asking you, do you think then that what's going to happen a year from now when you get married, on the altar, does that matter? And they'll say it's very nice and it's important to our families, but we loved each other before that. So loving each other gives us permission to share with each other our human sexual selves. And I say to them, let me put to you another case. It's 10 years down the line. You're married, neither one of you looks as good as you do today. You got a few kids and a lot of bills to pay. And one day you find out that when you thought he was at work, your husband was in fact at a local motel. And in fact, he's having an affair. And you challenge him and you say, are you doing this? And in a moment of candor, he says, yes, he is. And you say, how could you do that? And he says to you, look, I love you, you're the mother of my children, but I'm in love with this other woman. And you say, no, you can't be in love with two people. Well, who says you can't? You know what? The truth is we can fall in love a million times. But what makes it uniquely different, this thing called marriage, is that I committed myself before God and the community of faith to one person. So love is not all you need, unless love is coupled with that solemn commitment we call the sacrament of marriage. And I'm telling you, I believe that premarital sex is the ground, the seed for which we set up the disappointment of extramarital. Because the truth is, love is not all you need. And we mislead our young people by letting them believe that, and it will inevitably set them up for the great fall, which happens in about 45% of the marriages in America in terms of unfaithfulness. Let me move on if I can. I want to suggest too that in every attempt to celebrate marriage and family life, I wish we could talk more about aging. I wish we could talk more about the great glory which is our parents and grandparents, and suggest to anybody who enters into a marriage that you've got to ask yourself the question, how well or how poorly do I handle the aging of the people I love? Because one day it will be me. And how will that go? You know, and we don't talk about it. We think it's nice that senior citizens do their thing, and we hope somebody someday can take care of them when the time comes. But it's got to be a part of family life for all of us. You know, the day my father died and I sat down with my sister and brother-in-law and said, can you take mommy in your home? And they were going to quick answer and say, of course. And I said, don't. Take a week or two and go find out what your marriage can handle and what your kids can handle. Because it's going to change your life to bring in this elderly woman. And it has. But it's also been one of the greatest things in the world. And she's handicapped and she needs help. And they are learning the importance of generosity and family love. And it's a great, great gift to them. But I think it's important that we, as ministers of family life, be willing to talk about what do you feel for the aged? And how well or how poorly are you handling it? I have a niece who didn't handle it well. And so I had to remind her that the very grandmother she doesn't want to help pick up and clean up is the same grandmother who wiped her butt when she was a child. And how is it okay to do it for an infant, but not to care to do it lovingly for the senior citizen? We're all part of the same continuum. We're all part of that same wonderful family. From womb to tomb, from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death, we are called on to love, respect, and honor one another. And it's got to be happening in the family if it's to have any meaning at all. The other thing I'm going to suggest we try to do, and I promise I'll try to wrap this up soon, but I think one of the greatest difficulties in the church, and one of the reasons we're not getting young people, is because we've got a reputation for being inconsistent, that we say one thing and we do another. And one of the reasons I love someone like Pope Francis is he's the real deal. I love the fact that I was on a TV show this past week, and they said, Rush Limbaugh has accused the Holy Father of being a Marxist. What do you think of that? And I said, well, I don't really care what Rush Limbaugh thinks, but I'll tell you, he's not a Marxist. He might be a socialist, but here's the real deal. He loves poor people, and he lives among them, and he's always lived among them, and he takes the message and he walks the walk. And how can you argue with a guy who's doing the deal, who's actually practicing what he preaches? And we get ourselves in trouble as a church whenever we don't do that. Where did these scandals come from? It came from us talking one way and acting another. We're the church of respect for life, yeah, unless you were a kid, and then you were at risk. What does it mean that we would be followers of a Christ who said, woe to those who hurt the little ones? Better for them a millstone should be tied around their neck and they be thrown into the river, while we're covering up for priests who pillage kids. And we did, and the world noticed. And so the hypocrisy has to be gotten rid of, or we have no credibility. We cannot call people to love and embrace the church when they look at us with great cynicism. And the only way to stop the cynicism is to practice what we preach and to be consistent. An example from my own life. I used to be at this parish, Maria Regina in Seaford, and I'd say the 7 o'clock Mass every morning and then go off to my job at Family Life. And there was this one guy at Mass, and he would sit right up front every morning, and this guy looked like he was seeing the beatific vision. He had the most beautiful, illuminated face. He was really a prayerful, beautiful guy. Keep that guy in mind. It's around Christmas time, and I got to get down to the Massapequa Mall to get gifts for my nieces and nephews, because that's the meaning of Christmas, right? Anyway, to get down there, you go down, believe it or not, a road called Hicksville Road. And Hicksville Road is a single-lane highway. So I'm going, and I end up behind someone who must be the slowest driver in America. This guy never even found his gas pedal. He's just rolling by on fumes. So I decide, I look around, I don't see anybody coming. I'm gonna go around the guy. I gotta get down to the shopping mall. So I pull into the oncoming lane of traffic, nobody's coming. I start to go. Just at that moment, don't you know, a truck comes from the other direction. I quick have to get back into my lane of traffic. As I do that, I cut off the slow driver. The slow driver went off a little bit on the road. Suddenly, the slow driver finds his gas pedal. He's on my tail, he's honking his horn, he's flashing these bright lights even though it's the middle of the day. He's clearly furious with me. And then the son of a gun, so furious with me, pulls his car into the oncoming lane of traffic, pulls his car right up next to me, turns to me, and gives me the finger. At which point our eyes meet. It's the guy from church. I kid you not, the guy from church, right? So what do you think I did? I gave him a blessing, you know? The next morning at the 7 o'clock Mass, he's sitting at the last row. He waits till everybody else leaves church and he says, Father Jim, I want to apologize. Yesterday, I can't believe I gave a priest the finger. I can't believe that. I said, I can't believe you give anybody the finger. I can't believe I pulled into the oncoming lane of traffic to go down to stupidly shop at the mall, and I risked your life and the truck driver's life and my life. I said, you know what we did, John? We did the church thing here, and then we walked outside of church, and all the values we say we believe went right out the window. We're not consistent. We're not real. I have this wonderful habit with the nieces and nephews. I did certainly when they were younger. They come to my Mass, and then I say to them, look, I'm going to take you out for lunch after Mass, but on the way to lunch, you have to tell me what my homily was about. Not easy for them. So I got to really listen to what Uncle Jim said. One day I gave what I thought was a really good homily, about the importance of custody of the tongue. You know, watching what you say. We curse, we lie, we swear, we gossip, we say things that are so negative, we put down, we pick, and we got to watch our tongues. Anyway, I thought it was a decent homily. I get in the car with the 3 kids, we start driving, and sure enough, the same thing happens. Somebody else cuts me off, and I lose it. You know, the words out of my mouth, you wouldn't believe. All my Italian came out, I got to tell you. And little Anthony was 12 years old. He's tapping me on the shoulder from the back, and I'm like not bothering with him. I'm so furious with this guy who cut me off. And Anthony says, Uncle Jim, can I ask you a question? What, Anthony? I'm busy right now. What is it? Uncle Jim, do you even listen to your homily? Consistency is everything in terms of the power to teach. I am not consistent when I drive. I'm not consistent when I teach. I know that I contradict myself, and happily the people I love, my family, are not shy about telling me that. And I think that's what we got to do. To be really powerfully committed to Christ means I have to also be willing to accept the criticism, be open to the criticism, and invite it from the people I love the most, because who knows us better, and who can challenge us when we really need to be challenged. Final story, I promised them I'm going to stop and let you guys move on to your next thing, but I think there are 2 powerful things that I would ask you to do when you leave this particular conference today. You might be doing both of them, but maybe not. One thing I'm going to ask you to do is, I think that love, Christian love, is powerfully lived in 2 ways. It's lived by what we say, because it's important to say those words, I love you. But it's also, obviously, by the power behind the words. The Joe Parag who's there for his wife. The doing is as important as the saying. But just let's go with the saying. If you could, when you leave today, go home to your family and make a point of going up to each member of your family and letting them know, I know we have moments when we get on each other's nerves. I know sometimes we disagree. I know sometimes I make you angry. But I need you to know that you matter, that you mean the world to me, and that I love you. You know, I've always been very close to my one nephew, Matthew. And always, because I helped to raise him, we were very, very close, and he's always hugging me, kissing me. I love you, Uncle Jim. I love you, Matthew. It was just a very openly affectionate relationship. And then we sent him to this all-boys high school, Chaminade High School. And one day I'm driving him to school, and this kid never, ever left me, ever, without giving me a hug and a kiss. And we pull up to the curb out in front of Chaminade, and 3 of his buddies are there from his class. I guess he was a sophomore. And he, for the first time in his life, goes to give me a handshake. And I said, what is that? Don't make this worse than it is, Uncle Jim. I said, no, 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 Matthew. I'll tell you what. You're not willing to hug and kiss me because those guys are there, those jerks who you won't even know a few years from now. I've been there since the beginning, and I'm going to be there till the end. And you are going to give me a hug and a kiss, and you are not going to be ashamed of affection when you care about people. And he did. He leaned over, and he gave me a big hug, and he gave me a big kiss. And I'll never forget what he whispered in my ear. He said, one day, Uncle Jim, I will murder you. But it still was the right thing to do, you know? Final story. When you leave here today, here's the other thing, the great myth about Catholics. Oh, you know, they have that thing called confession. 8 out of 10 of you probably haven't been near a priest in confession in ages, and I'm saying that including the priests. We have this great, wonderful gift which can make sense of so many things in family life that don't make sense, and we don't use the gift. We say to the young couples, you should go to church, it's good for your marriage, but then we sometimes call people to live something we're not living, which is the use of the sacraments. I want to talk about the fact that every one of us here will be better off if we go to confession. Every one of us, if we don't just go the way we usually go, but if we could open up that dark corner of the soul that every one of us has, where we did something a long time ago, embarrassing, we're so ashamed, we can't believe, we can't imagine articulating that to some priest. If we could be willing to seek and to grant forgiveness, the acceptance of God's mercy for us, and then in turn our willingness to share it with others, I believe that is the strongest grace in family life, when somebody in the family goes to confession and comes back relieved of the burden because they finally have been freed from the sin. And by the way, I don't like to go. I live on Long Island, but I go into the city, the St. Francis Church right by Penn Station there. They have like practically 24-hour confession. It's wonderful. But I make sure I find this one priest who speaks no English. But I must say that every time I go, while I go in with a knot in my stomach, I always walk out feeling better. I feel a burden has been lifted. It's a great thing. Forgiveness, it is the glue, the cement, the meaning that I think makes family life much more than we ever thought it could be. And here I close with a final story, I promise. Young sister, Patty, I told you about, she's the Catholic one. She's married to this nice doctor. They seem to be doing okay. What do I know? First year of marriage, it's a tough year. I don't realize how tough it is, but they've even gone through occasional moments of separation. She finds out at the end of the first year of their marriage, she's pregnant. He says to her, we're not having a good marriage. This is not the time for us to be parents. It's time for us to have a child later, not now. If you want to work on this marriage, I want you to think about terminating now, and we'll get back to making babies when we're in better shape. Now, you would think it wouldn't even be in consideration. Nice Catholic family, brother's a priest and all that. Wasn't easy. She didn't want to be divorced. She did not want to lose this man she loved. She wanted to work it out, but he was making a particular demand. And that particular demand meant no baby right now. She was even scheduled, in fact, for her abortion. She came home, I guess a day or so before the abortion, to see my mom, my dad, and I. And she told us what she was thinking of doing to hold on to her marriage. And I remember, you know, we were all obviously opposed. And she listened to our arguments and then said, you know, I have to do what I have to do. And I hope you'll respect my decision. And I remember what I said, even though it's years ago. I said, if you kill this kid, then it's not only the baby who dies, because as far as we're concerned, you are dead to us too. And she broke into tears and she ran out of the house. But before she got out of the house, my mother got her and said, Patty, I hate what you were going to do. That's my grandchild in there. But when I accepted you in my life, Patty, I accepted you no matter what. So while I will always be so sad about what you're about to do, I will always love you. Your brother spoke for himself, but you are always welcome in our home. Patty went out, she got in the car with her husband, off they went. The next day they had the schedule. She got to the abortion clinic. She was actually on the table when she shared with the doctor that this was not something she really wanted. And he said, well, then if you don't want it, don't do it. She got up off that table, she came home to us, they separated, ultimately annulled their marriage, and she came and lived with my parents and I. And in fact, when the baby was born, I didn't want her to go through childbirth alone, so I took those Lamaze classes, and I was the coach when the baby was born. If any of you need a coach, I am available, okay? But I tell you this, not just for the happy ending of Matthew's birth, but a long time after that, I took Patty out and I said, where, when you were on the table, about to have that child aborted, did you find the strength to do the right thing? And she said, well, I certainly didn't get the strength from you. She said, when I needed someone to understand and to love unconditionally, you gave me judgment, condemnation, and total rejection. But Mommy, who believed in the sacredness of life every bit as much as you, still was able to love me even though I was going to do something terrible. And I knew if I was loved that much, then I could also find the love to do the right thing. I believe that in family life, the ability to love unconditionally, to forgive without condition, to love no matter what, is the very heart and essence of the families you and I want to make, the families we want to celebrate in our parishes, the families we can be. I was an idiot the way I responded, because I loved conditionally. The more you and I as ministers of marriage and the sacraments can be people of unconditional love, unconditional mercy, unconditional forgiveness, the more I believe we will bring people into the family and the church will truly grow as it should. Be like my mother, don't be like me. God bless you and thanks for listening.